Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar this afternoon for Cloud Design Box with RivaNET. We're going to be talking you through the ways to save time using Office 365, Teams and SharePoint. I'm Darren Hemming, I'm the Operations Manager. I'm working today with Tony Phillips, and we've got John from RivaNET, and we'll be working with Lloyd, who's one of our lead trainers, to look at some questions towards the end. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about what RivaNET does?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you for that. And I'd say thanks to everybody for joining in. I know it's a big ask when we're all so busy, but I think that if we can come away with a few practical tips and hints and things, it will make a huge difference, not just to teachers, but also to the pupils who, at the end of the day, are the ones on the receiving end. So yeah, John Statehouse, I'm IT Services Director at RivaNET. For those of you who don't know much about RivaNET, we are an education technology specialists. I've been running for some 20 years now, and we work with a large number of independent schools and colleges across the UK, a few logos of which you can see on that page there. So what we do is actually very varied. We do everything from providing basic support services up to high-level technical and school consultancy. So examples could be we provide on-site and remote support services. We deliver network and Wi-Fi installations, and we also increasingly help schools with their cyber security, particularly ransomware protection, a bit of a hot topic currently, but we do lots more than that. If you flick over to the next slide. So, you know, the schools we work with, we have really good relationships, and these are just a few of the kind words we've had back recently from the schools we work with. We're also a gold partner for Microsoft, and we've spent many years now helping schools with their Microsoft or Office 365 journey. So thinking about the pandemic, some schools were in a good place at when the pandemic emerged, but some were only just starting out or were new to 365. So in the early days, we helped many schools get the basic 365 building blocks up and running. And from there, they could start teaching and doing online learning in earnest. So if you go to the next slide. So one example here is John Lyons School in Harrow. They had 365 in place, but weren't using it fully. And they needed some urgent help to get everything properly configured, securely and safely, a bit of fine tuning, and also a bit of one-to-one training for the teachers. So in that example, we were able to, with a couple of days work with them, get them up and running and delivering lessons very effectively. In terms of today, we work with a number of specialist partners with expertise in specific areas or with products that we think are particularly valuable to schools. So we've been working with Cloud Design Box now for quite some time, and I've introduced them into a number of the schools we work with, and the results have been absolutely superb. So that's all I have to say right now, so I'll hand you back and let's crack on.
Thank you, John, and we'll come back to you towards the end to have a look at your contact details and some of the ways that people can get in touch with you to get support from you.
Super.
So these are the main things we're looking at today. Tony's going to do a demo for you in a moment. These are the main benefits for us to look at in terms of teachers and students. So one of the things that we do, rather than just creating the class teams, which is a great way to extend the classroom, we also connect that into centralized areas, which you might call subject sites. So if you're talking about an English subject, or one of the modern languages or the sciences, you'll get a specific subject site where teachers can put all their long-term resources, students can access those as well, and that all connects into the teams so that you can get to those resources through the teams, and teachers can assign resources from those centralized areas. And that works all the way through from, you know, the very young students. It certainly works in a prep context, because you can create permanent resource areas for year 1, year 2, year 3, whatever you call your lower years. And then in the teacher area, you've also got benefits because you can share your resources. So instead of individual teachers siloing their own resources, if you can share within the English department, if you can share within the modern languages department, if you have a number of students working at the prep level and you have different classes, all the resources for those classes can be shared in a centralized place, so that individual teachers for those forms don't have to upload their own content. They can share in the centralized areas as well. Altogether, this should make the life of a teacher a bit easier. It should save some teacher time because of the sharing, and it should drive up quality as well, because the heads of department and the senior leaders will be able to look at those centralized resources, and they will have confidence that every resource that's being used with students is a quality resource from that centralized area. And this, of course, allows you then to take that learning home, and when students are working on those resources at home, they've also got access to those long-term resources. They can start to become independent, autonomous learners. And of course, the parents will be able to see the quality of those resources as well, and have comfort that the right level of resources is being used for their child. So these are the things that Tony's going to cover for us today. We'll look at those subject sites and the centralized resources and how they integrate with the teams. And also there's the option that if you've got different schools all within the same tenant, they could potentially work with each other. So what you may have, for example, is perhaps 2 or 3 independent schools that work separately, but also come together. So you might have the prep school being a very distinct thing from the senior school, but you still want there to be a smooth transition between them for the students, and you want teachers to be able to dip into both those schools and support. So we can create collaboration areas that cut across all of those different partitions as well. And also finally, looking at what we can do in terms of analytics for senior leaders. So using things like insights to see what the general usage is on things like Teams and Teams meetings and assignments, and also some very specific tooling that we have that allows senior leaders to see which assignments are being set across the whole estate, and seeing which departments and perhaps which schools are setting the most assignments and have the best participation in terms of assignments and homework. So Tony, if you'd like to take over and do your demo for us.
So I know we've got some new people on the call. I've also got some current customers as well. So what we'll be doing today is going through the Cloud Design Box setup of SharePoint and Teams, which will hopefully save you lots of time. I know we've got some current customers on the call too, so hopefully you'll have lots of questions that you might want to ask. And we've got Lloyd, one of our trainers, who's on the chat today, so please feel free to post your questions across to him during this session. So just before we get started, I guess one thing to just sort of enforce is this is a solution that's not just for the pandemic, but also a long-term solution for the school. So rather than just being sort of a quick fix for the current lockdown and the unfortunate events of obviously last year, the idea is that even before the pandemic, schools were trying to move to the cloud, and although things have accelerated over the last year and people have moved quite quickly to cloud solutions, it's really important to have that long-term solution. So actually, at the end of this academic year, you can still use it really well going on into the next year, and you have that continuality as well. So first, we're going to have a quick look at SharePoint. Although we're looking at Teams today, I think it's really important to show you the SharePoint aspect of it, where you can publish resources to the entire school. So I've started off in SharePoint, and this is SharePoint intranet, where we can publish information across the entire school. So we've got some web parts on this homepage. We've got the school logo and the school colours, and I've got some training videos on here as well. And this is now where you can publish resources across the entire school. So a bit like a traditional intranet. Across the top here, I've got the school logo, the school colours, and a mega menu. And when I pull this out, I can see all of the sites and teams that I have access to across the entire school. So some of these are communication sites where I can publish resources to large groups of people throughout the entire school. So it might be policy information, it could be IT support guides, it could be marketing information, and that's information that is available to everybody in the school, but only certain people can edit those resources. So a quick example of that might be a staff site, where you've got maybe a staff briefing that you want to publish, a lunch rota, maybe some important documents that you want to publish, such as policies, staff handbook. And those resources will be available to all staff, but maybe only certain members of staff can actually edit those documents. So if I go into policies as a quick example, so I've got all my policy documents stored here. I've got an expiry date when those policies expire. I've color coded those. I can even set up a quick email reminder to let me know when those policies are due to expire. We've also got some collaboration teams here, and these are areas where I can publish resources, and these are secure areas for individual teams within the school. So these really are that long-term replacement for some of those staff and student shared drives that you might have in school currently. So if you've got a network share called finance, then the long-term replacement for that might be a finance team within some Microsoft Teams, and that's where your confidential documents will be stored. And it's really important to consider that actually, it's a really difficult move into the cloud, and it's really important that you get that long-term user adoption across the entire school. So where you might have had solutions before, whether they're VLEs or SharePoint or Teams, you might have had a few tech-savvy teachers using the system really well, but maybe other teachers might have struggled with it or not completely used it. So when you come to implement these solutions, it's really important to have some training to support that, have that long-term plan in place, and make sure that you have that digital strategy to make sure that you get used well across everybody in the school, and that you bring everybody on that journey with you. So inside these collaboration spaces, for some of those, maybe some of those groups of people that work together inside school, these are secure areas. So if I'm a member of the finance team, I'll see the finance team and I can store my resources in that team, and nobody else can see that team unless they're a member of finance. Now these are teams as well as SharePoint sites. So if I go into the data team, I can see all of the channels within that team. So if I go to the exam analysis channel, I can see all of these documents here within SharePoint. I can work on them. I can also access them inside Microsoft Teams as well. So you don't have to use SharePoint or Teams. You can use either of those platforms. And when it comes to saving teach time, you will have all of your class teams created from your MIS data. So if you're using something like iSAMS, we'll pull out all of that class data for you automatically. So a typical school might have 800 to 1200 class teams created every single academic year. So that's quite a lot of teams. And if I was a teacher and I taught maybe 3 or 4 of those English classes, then ideally I'd want to be uploading my resources 4 times every single academic year to all of those individual class teams. So what we do is we create some central subject resource areas that Darren mentioned earlier. So these will be for your long-term resources that are going to be there for years and years to come. So again, these are replacing some of those shared drives that you might have on the network currently. And these are places where staff can store their long-term resources, but also collaborate with other teachers and publish resources to students long-term as well. So under my subjects, you'll only see a list of subjects that you teach or subjects that you're enrolled on if you're a student. If you're a teacher, you can always go to all subjects and access any subjects. So if you're covering another lesson, you can always jump into all subjects and go into another subject area. So if I go into English as an example, so this is available in Teams and SharePoint. We'll jump into Teams shortly to have a look at it from there. So I've got my staff only resources that only staff can access. This will be my staff channel inside Teams. And then I've got some student facing long-term resources as well. And again, these are synced from your MIS data. So we try and get some teacher learning contacts at the school involved in planning out these sites. So it might be the case that your school teaches by year group or key stage or course. And again, those can be created automatically and permissioned using the ISAMs or MIS data. So if I was a student in year 7, I would see 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I can revise back from previous years, but I can't see year 12 or year 13. So I can't see any age inappropriate content. And what you'll store inside these resource areas are any resources that you might use ongoing throughout the academic year. So Darren, do you have any sort of examples, as a teacher, what sort of resources you would store here long term?
Yeah, so it's everything that you would want the students to access. This will literally be the only place within your environment that students would come for resources, whether they're Word documents, PowerPoints, spreadsheets, pictures, videos, PDFs. They'd all be in those locations. So you could cover this off using the different topics that you do. So, for example, you might in Year 11 English, you might have a topic called Of Mice and Men, as we do there, or you might divide it differently. You might have, a folder there for novels and a folder for drama, so on, and then in there you'd have subfolders for these different topics. So it's absolutely fine to store content inside folders in these spaces. So it would be everything that the students need to see, either because they can independently go and find those resources, or because the teacher has directed them to those resources. Either they've just given them the search term to type in, so go in there and type in Catcher in the Rye, go in there and type characters, or in the team, and I think you'll show this later, Tony, you might have actually assigned a resource to particular students in that class, but that resource will come from that centralized area.
Yes, the idea is that you're not creating more work for yourself by uploading resources into every single class team. You've got this one central place to store those resources, and you can just reuse them from this central resource area. So yeah, inside, as Darren mentioned, inside SharePoint, I could search for these resources. So it might be Of Mice and Men. It could be something that we've tagged it with, such as a AQA exam board resource or, Key Stage 3. And the idea is that if you're using an iPad or an Android device or a desktop, you can just quickly find those relevant documents really quickly just by searching for them, either across the entire school or just inside a particular library.
And of course, these days, Tony, you don't even need to have the full client installed on your machine. You don't need to have the full desktop version of Word or PowerPoint, because you can just open it through the browser using Word Online or PowerPoint Online, Excel Online, OneNote Online, which are all built into this Office 365 platform.
Yep, so if I open up any of these documents, you'll see that it opens up in Office Online. So I could be using another device. It could be an iPad, Android device. It's quite device agnostic, and I can edit those documents. Also, if you do have these central resource areas, if there is a resource, maybe it could be a mark sheet that several teachers have to complete at the same time, then if you do have it in these central areas, then more than one person can edit the same document at the same time. So it hopefully saves you a bit of time by not having to email the document around, or by having it on a network share where it becomes locked until the other person closes that document. And of course, you've got things like version history in here as well, so you can always go back to an earlier version of those documents. And if somebody's made a mistake to it, or if you just want to go back to an earlier version of it, then I can quickly restore that document back to an earlier version. You've also got the recycle bin here as well. So if you do delete a document, it will go into that recycle bin, and I've got 93 days to restore it back again. So really quick and easy to restore those documents back. So those central resource areas, when we move into Teams in a minute, you'll see that you can reuse those resources across all of the classes that you teach. So just jumping over into our class dashboard, we're going to go straight into Microsoft Teams now. So I'm going to open up 11Y English 3. And the idea behind the class dashboard is it's just a quick and easy way to jump into your class Teams. Obviously, you can go straight in through Teams as well. So we're inside Microsoft Teams, and we've got a conversation area where we can have those discussions with the class. And again, it's not just for lockdown, not just for having those online remote lessons, but actually extending the classroom as well. If you've got a student who's too shy to put their hands up in class or too anxious to speak in front of other people, this is a great place where they can take part in those conversations and be a bit more confident when communicating with the rest of the class. Now, you have got a files area inside Teams, and if you've used Teams before, you'll see that this is probably the place where you might have stored resources for the class previously. Now, one problem with that is if I teach several Year 11 English classes, that means I need to upload those resources several times in all those different teams. And as a head of department, you can't keep track of the quality of those resources because they're stored in individual class teams. And it's not a great idea as a head of department to add yourself into every single class team, because it becomes really difficult to manage your own classes and communicate with your own students. So one thing that we do, and again, you could do this yourself if you wanted to, we've added a tab into every single English class team for those central English resources. So if I go into student resources and Year 11, you'll see that these are the central resources that we just saw earlier inside SharePoint, but from within the context of that class team. And this will be the same across all of those English class teams. So any resources I put in here, they're available in any English class team. And that just means as a teacher, I only have to upload the resource once into that central area. As a head of department, I can keep track of the quality of the resources being used in the classes just by checking that central resource area. So you get much more consistency when you're delivering those lessons.
Presumably, Tony, when we do our training for this, we make it really clear that that resources tab there is not a resources tab just for this class, but it is a shared space for all English teachers, just so they're clear that if they upload something into there, it's not just their stuff, it belongs to the whole English department.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, English teachers can work on these resources together. So instead of it being a single teacher who's having to organise those resources, create them and make them available to that class, as a department you can do it together. So again, hopefully save you a bit of time by working together as a department, only having one version of those documents, so one version of the truth that you have to keep updated.
Tony, one of the questions that quite often comes up in regard to this idea of centralizing and sharing resources is that teachers feel they need to differentiate a particular resource for their class. So they may say, yeah, but no, I can't use that centralized one. I have to make my own version for this class because, you know, it's a particularly gifted class, or it's a class where some students might have additional requirements. Now, what I would say to that is, yes, you absolutely should be differentiating these materials, but you can do that in the centralized place. You can work in the central area. You can start off with a core document, and then you can make a copy of that document, and you can add some extension activities for gifted students. You can add some extra activities at the start to scaffold it a bit more for students who need more help. So you can end up with two completely different versions of the resource, but they're both centralized. What you then have is a centralized and fully differentiated bank of resources, rather than the odd, really good differentiated resource being tucked away in a silo in a single class. So you're feeding back into the pot all the time.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Anything that you might use more than once, ideally sits in that central area, because again, it's going to save you time rather than having to upload it individually. And when you're creating your assignments as well, and again, we've got some videos and other sessions that go into this in much more detail. When we are creating assignments for this class, so if I go in here and I create a brand new assignment for this group, maybe it's of mice and men, call it a worksheet. You might have some worksheets available that actually you want to set to multiple classes, you want to reuse year after year. And when I go to add resources, you'll see that you get your options to upload it from your own individual OneDrive, which is great for your own personal documents, but it's not great for sharing documents and reusing them. You've got your class notebook, you've got adding a link, creating a new file, but we've also got this Teams option as well. And inside here, you'll see those that central English team. And again, I can grab those long-term resources to reuse in this assignment. So I can grab one of the worksheets, I can attach it to that lesson. And if it's a document that I want students to be able to edit themselves, I can switch that to students edit their own copy, give them some instructions. Please complete the worksheet. And when I assign this out, it's going to grab that resource from that central resource area and copy it and send it out to each individual student. So I can give them a number of points for that particular piece of work. I could add in my rubric grading criteria. I can assign that to an individual class or to multiple classes that I teach. So potentially assign that to a number of English classes that I teach. And I could even assign it to, again, maybe if it was an intermediate or an advanced level of homework, then I could even group it to a number of individual students rather than the whole class. And when I set that assignment, that will distribute that out to all those students. And again, it'll be grabbing those resources from that central resource area. So I just want to focus on, again, some of those key bits that we mentioned at the beginning about saving time and centralizing some of your resources. So using those central resource areas inside Teams means that we're not having to duplicate those resources. We can reuse them in the assignments, and it means the head of department can keep track of the quality of those resources from those central resource areas. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was insights and analytics and keeping track of those as well. So you do have your built-in insights, which are great for measuring student engagement. So you can add this as a tab to any of your class teams, and this will give you an overview of any student activity. So I can see what students are active and which ones maybe didn't take part in some of those online meetings. You can see that this is a demo site, so we've got quite a lot of students who were absent from at least one meeting last month. I can see the submissions and the average grades and the distributions over time. So it's great at measuring student adoption and student engagement. One thing it doesn't do is measure sort of staff user adoption and making sure that staff are using it well across the entire school. So one thing that we do add into Microsoft Teams is our own assignment analytic dashboard. And this is here to give you an overview of how well Teams assignments are being used by teachers across the entire school. So again, another question we get is, my heads of department want to keep track of are assignments being set in their department. So one way of doing that is by looking at our assignment analytics, and I can see a table of all the subjects. I can see which subjects are setting lots of homework for their particular classes, and I can also see maybe which subject areas might need a bit more extra support. So maybe some more CPD time, some more training focused on those particular individuals. And I can even drill into one of those subject areas. I can see their usage over time, and I can also then drill down into an individual class, and I can see what work was set on what particular date and when it's due. So again, as a head of department, you can then make sure you're keeping track of the quality of resources, looking at those central resource areas. You're making sure that assignments have been set by the teachers in your department, and you're not having to add yourself into every single class team and manage those individually. If you did need to observe a lesson, then the class teacher can always manually add you in temporarily and you can observe that lesson. But in many cases, hopefully, by having those central resource areas, by having those analytics, you'll be able to save time by not having to jump into each individual class team to check that, you know, the quality of the work's there and that work is actually being set inside your department. In addition to your individual classes, we'll just have a quick look at what that central subject team looks like from within Teams. So we looked at it within SharePoint earlier. This is a view from within Teams. So this is the English staff site, staff team. And in the Files tab, these are all my staff-only resources that only staff can see. In the Student Resources channel, under the Files tab, these are my student-facing resources. And again, if I go into year 11, these are the same resources that we saw inside SharePoint and the same resources that we saw inside those individual class teams. And any document that I edit here will update in all those different locations.
So Tony, can the students come into this English team?
So the students can't come into this English team. This is for staff only. But the students can see the documents that you drop into this channel, into the student resource channel, but they will only see that from within the individual class team. So as a student, I won't see this team at all, but when I go into my individual class teams, I'll see those embedded as that additional tab, and I'll only see the student resources, and I'll be able to access those resources from within the individual class team. So as a student, you never need to leave that class team to get access to those long-term resources. Mm-hmm. As a teacher, I guess, you know, as a department, as a subject, you may wish to have your online meetings in here. So you could do that just with the staff in your department. You can share files with the rest of members of staff in your department. You can work on those documents together. But students will only see the resources that you post in the student resource file area.
Right. So if you have a conversation in that team, you can be safe. You can be confident that students won't see that conversation.
Yeah. So students aren't members of these teams, but they do have access to this library.
Brilliant. Now I know in this case English is a subject, but it's also kind of a department or a faculty. If that was French or chemistry or physics, those are individual subjects. So I guess they'd get their own subject site. But what if you were the head of science or the head of MFL, and you wanted to have wider conversations, not just with French teachers, but with French teachers and German teachers and Spanish teachers and Mandarin teachers and Welsh teachers, all the same time? Could you do that in a similar sort of space?
Yes, I think in the end it's up to the school to decide what they class as a subject and what's the department. I think as a student, French would make more sense to me than modern languages, and it'll mean I only see the French resources that you know, that I'm enrolled in French, so I only see the French resources. That as a student makes more sense to me. But as a member of staff, like you say, you might want to collaborate across those different subject areas, maybe as an MFL department or in this case here, a science department. Okay. So yeah, we can also create those science, so those departmental teams as well. And this joins up all those different subjects into a single team. And that's where you could have your departmental meetings, maybe share some best practices, share any department policies, etc. in here. But your student resources, they'll probably go inside the subject teams. I guess you might also want to take it even a step higher than that. And how do you collaborate with all the teachers and all the all the teachers and maybe all the staff across the entire school? And again, you might want an all teachers team, and this might be a place where you have your staff briefings, you might have your assemblies here, and you might just have general communication in here. Now I'm guessing as teachers you get lots of emails, so you might be able to save time and maybe cut down on those emails if you've got a place to post about those specific topics that people can jump into and they can read them if it's appropriate to them, rather than sending out an all staff email. So in this example here, I've got a general space where it might be information for all staff. I've got a private channel here, the one with the padlock on it, which only SLT can see. I've just added the senior leadership team into this channel. I've also got a staff briefings and assembly channel where I might have my daily staff briefings in here. You might have your assemblies that you put on the screens for students here as well if you're back in school. And I've also got even some, some social aspects to this as well. So I've got a swap shop, which might just encourage usage. It might help with engagement if staff have other reasons to go to this all teacher team as well. So that's a really quick overview. I know I've not got a huge amount of time here. We need to have some time for some questions as well. I will just quickly show you that this is the data team that we saw earlier inside SharePoint, and this is the view of it from within Teams. So this is the exam analysis channel, and this is the files tab within that exam analysis channel. So you can see that these are exactly the same resources that we saw inside SharePoint, but from within Teams. And the idea behind that SharePoint intranet is if you do have staff who maybe aren't quite confident using Teams yet, maybe they haven't used it, throughout the pandemic and they're quite new to it, then for some staff, SharePoint might be a bit more of an intuitive space for them. It's got more of a traditional website navigation. It's easy to see the structured sites here, easy to get into them. And for them, they might want to go into data team and work on some documents from within that website interface. And like I said, there's no right or wrong way of doing that. It's just preference, and it might help you with that user adoption steps. So
I guess it's part of that rite of passage, Tony. So if you're a school who currently has all your content on, S drive, T drive, U drive, USB sticks, and you just want to start moving that to the cloud, then moving those documents into those collaboration teams is actually quite an easy step to take. And especially if you use the SharePoint side of it, without using, as you say, any of the chat stuff. And then over time, once people get to grips with using the documents in that space, they may transition to using the teams. Yeah,
and I think that it's part of that user adoption journey that isn't going to happen overnight. It's it needs that long-term plan in place. When you think about this, you might want to put a plan in place where in 3 months' time you turn off some of the or you make some of those file shares read-only. In another 3 months' time, you might want to then turn them off or have that long-term plan to do that. And then in the meantime, give staff some some training and get them confident using it to help support them and to make it not feel such an overwhelming change. Staff, teachers and staff have been using the same systems for decades, and to change overnight is too hard. It does take some time to get familiar, get confident with these systems.
Yeah.
And as a school, I think it's really important to get some feedback on those sessions, measure how well they're going, and then adjust your long-term strategy, whether it's to speed things up if things are going really well and people want to do more, or slow things down if people need a bit more extra support. But it's about having that feedback loop, because you don't want to overwhelm staff, you don't want to change everything overnight, but you want to make that steady progress and get people confident with it in the long run. So Darren, do you want to share your slides and we'll just finish off with some questions?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry about the sound problems at the beginning. I think it remuted me.
So you should be able to see our contact details now, our website. If you go to our website, by the way, there's a resources section on there, and you can see lots of links to content. They're actually just on YouTube, but we bring them forward and categorize them for your easy viewing pleasure.
Sorry,
and
I can't see that, Darren. Do you want to just show?
Oh, sorry.
Sharing your screen.
Let me redo that. There we are. How's that?
Great, I can see that.
Lovely. Yeah, so website and the links to videos. There are some functional things in there, like how to, do certain things in Teams, how to do things in SharePoint. But there are also some really interesting conversations that Tony and I have had with head teachers and senior leaders and teachers about the different ways of using these technologies and some of the different challenges that the different schools have had and different types of schools have had. Certainly the challenge for independent schools is slightly different, and especially in terms of things like how you balance your prep and your senior schools and how you transition between the two. So it's well worth looking at those videos. You can use your camera to get the QR codes as well, of course.
Should we bring in Lloyd and see if we've got any questions? I think some good questions have come in.
Yep, so there's one question, really good one about class notebooks as well. So how about class notebooks that are linked to teams? So if a new team is created every year, how would there be a way to be able to use that content for the new classes?
Yep, so there's a couple of ways, and again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this, but we're trying to, I guess, trying to discuss the best practices and the stuff that would save you the most time. So and I'm sure Darren's got some opinions on this as well, but in terms of your class notebook, we would recommend that you mainly use it as a student exercise book, so they're taking their notes as if you're handing them out a physical book. If you do want to add some content in there, when you do start your new teams in a new academic year, you do get the option to start from a previous content library, so you can import a previous year's class notebook content. However, the only problem with that is, the same problem we mentioned before. If you teach several Year 11 English classes, which class notebook do you bring across? Which is the latest version? And again, you might be duplicating some work there yourself. So where possible, try and store some of those resources in your central resource areas and link to them in your class notebook. Darren, from a teacher learner perspective, what's your sort of view on class notebooks?
I think that's right. If you can get the students doing more work in the class notebooks than the teacher, then that's a good thing, because it's all about the students and their learning. Obviously, you would put some scaffolded materials maybe in the class notebook, which you could then push out. So I like doing tables, just a very simple table. If you're doing science, you might have vertebrates versus invertebrates. A basically empty table, and then you push that table out to every student so they get their own copy. That's the kind of content I would like to see in the teacher section. What is not a good idea is creating a page in the teacher section that is in turn full of Word documents and PowerPoints, because that's just going to get too heavy, and it may, from a technical perspective, may cause sync issues. In terms of managing the content, one of the things I've seen work really well this year, and I've done a video on this, a podcast with the vice principal of a girls' school. They had this issue. They had this problem of putting too much content inside the class notebook, doing too much work in there. And what they discovered they could do is within the subject sites, like you showed for English and Of Mice and Men and Seamus Heaney and all that, within those spaces, you can create a OneNote, because not every OneNote has to be a class notebook. You can just create a OneNote and you can fill that with sections. And if you put that inside the staff only area that we created, that then becomes kind of a resource bank that teachers can dip into, and then they can move those resources across into their own class notebooks just in time to assign those out to students, rather than having a class notebook that starts off with having a lot of content in it, which you may never use with those students or with the same students next year. So again, it's that idea of centralizing, sharing content so that you don't have to do all this copying around between the class notebooks every year. You centralize that content as much as possible, and then you push it out just in time. What that means is, instead of you bringing across the resources that may not be completely optimized, they may even have, you know, spelling mistakes and things in, instead of bringing that across each year, you pick your resources from a centralized place where the head of department, again, can keep an eye on it, make sure the quality is there, make sure it follows the department standards, and then you've always got the latest version. And that's really powerful as well for teachers who are just coming in to teach this topic for the first time. It may be these teachers are newly qualified, so they haven't got that bank of resources yet. And if you're working in a primary school context or a prep context, you know, you might be teaching year 1 this year, and then next year you're teaching year 4, and this might be the first time you've ever taught year 4, so you don't have the resources. But if you can keep those resources in the subject areas, and if it's for Onenote, if it's for Class Notebook, if you can keep those resources in a centralized notebook for teachers, then the previous year's teacher has already put some great resources in, and you can just go pick them up and use them.
Yeah, and I think, like Dan said as well, it's about sharing some of that responsibility with the other people in departments as well. So you're creating those resources together. A really good question from Ian about how do you set this up? Well, what I've showed you today is obviously we automate this stuff from MIS data, so we can do it automatically. Everything I've showed you today, really, you could do yourself as well. So you could create some, you know, subject teams and add the tabs in. Obviously, that's quite time consuming and difficult to maintain, but that is something you can do as well. If I just share my screen again, I'll just quickly show you what we've done here. So this is inside the class team. What I've done here with the central resource area is we've automatically done this for, you know, the 800, 1200 classes there is. We've just added a SharePoint document library, and we've put a link to those central resource areas just by following this wizard. And that has added that central resource tab that we can then access from within that class team. So obviously there's all the permissions and things like that to think about, but you could potentially do that just by pressing the plus button and creating those central resource sites. And again, that's something that we automate as part of our tools as well. Any other questions, Lloyd?
Yep, so there was another question just about some of the permissions and talking about class materials as well. So if you've already been using Teams and you might use that area, so how would the permissions work for those resources tab? And could the student still access or edit any of those documents?
So in the resources tab, the way that we set it up is we make it read only for students and editable by staff. So if there was a document in here, really you probably don't want the students editing it because it's in that central place so all the students can access it. So if you did want to work on a document together in that class, you probably copy it over to your files tab just for use within that particular class. If there was a space where actually you did want to give all students access to it, then you could always share a link inside SharePoint and give people edit access to a particular document. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that in this particular case, but yeah, I could just grab this document, I could copy it into my local team. So I could press copy, I could go up to this team, I could put it in the student work area, could copy it into there, and I could copy it into a place where other people can actually access and then edit those documents.
So you're always asking yourself, who's involved in this particular bit of learning, and what do I want them to be able to do? So if you just want to send a document to a single student so that every student gets their own copy of it, then you'd use assignments. But if you want students to work collaboratively, I guess what I would do is in the class team, because that's the real virtual classroom, if you like, I would create a number of channels. And you don't have to secure them. You don't have to make a secure channel for each one, although you can. I just make a channel for maybe red group, yellow group, you know, or if it's English, you'd call it, you know, Shelley, Byron, Keats, and you'd create a separate group, and then you'd put those same students into that different group every time. And that's then a space where they can collaborate. And then, as Tony says, all you'd have to do is take a copy of that centralized resource and then copy it into each of those channels so that every student gets their own, well, every group of students, sorry, gets their own copy of that to work on. So you can see there, we've literally just created a single channel called collaboration, because we don't really mind if those groups of students see each other's work.
Yeah, I mean, we've not really went into detail today on things like channels and the other functionality, but to create a channel is really simple. Just go add channel, give it a name, click add, and that'll create a channel that all students can access and all students can edit documents in as well as obviously have their conversations in here. So that'll be quite a nice collaboration space for those students to work on that particular document. So again, you probably wouldn't want them working on that live document in that shared area because all students in all classes are going to be using those resources. But if I was to take a copy of it and put it inside that collaboration channel, then that's a place where just that class can work on that document together. So any other questions, Lloyd?
Yeah, there was one. So what happens if you want to make it look a bit more like a website instead of just working in teams? You know, could you do that as well?
Yeah, so I guess the website aspect of this, if you wanted to look more like a website, would be SharePoint. So if we go into any of these English sites, now this will be my department sites, and if I did want to create pages in here, if I did want to do things a bit more advanced, then I can edit these pages, I can create new pages. You can see it's really straightforward. I can edit this page, I can add web parts on it, so it could be more of a structured lesson plan. It could be something like a countdown timer to the exams. I could put a little countdown timer on there, put in some dates. There's all sorts you can do, and it's really easy to add content to these and create other pages and link them together. Lots of web parts that you can add out of the box and some of our own. But in the end, not every teacher is going to want to do that, and you're still going to want a consistent experience, you know, across the entire school. So that might be useful for some of those advanced teachers, but it might not be useful for everybody. And I guess the other thing you could do as well, if you did want to create that more of an interactive space, is use OneNote. So in any of my resource areas, I can create a brand new OneNote, and I'll call it, you know, Of Mice and Men topic. Create that. It'll create a brand new OneNote, and this isn't a class notebook. This is just a general OneNote. So, you know, it's a bit like a book that I've made here, and I can create my own sections, my own pages. I can insert rich content into there, whether it's audio, pictures, links, tables, embed videos and forms and quizzes on here. So I can do all of that without having to be a web developer and edit web pages. So I'll probably suggest using OneNote rather than creating lots of SharePoint pages, because what you tend to find is over time the member of staff looking after it might leave, and then nobody's been maintaining it. Lots of the links on the pages don't work. You might have found this situation if you've used, you know, SharePoint or Firefly or other things previously, that, you know, it's great while people are maintaining it, but it can be difficult to keep up to date. Whereas if you're using a OneNote, then anyone can jump into here, and as long as they've used Microsoft Word before, you know, they can edit these pages quite easily and build up that content.
Yeah, OneNote's great because you can add, you know, all kinds of links, obviously rich text, tables, links to things. You can insert videos. So OneNote's a very good place to do it. The other thing I like to do, Tony, because I think it makes it really easy for teachers to add content, is back in the subject site, you can add news items. because you're absolutely right. When you're creating static pages, you know, for the Tudor Revolution in government page or whatever, that content might become static, especially if it's a topic that changes. But what you can do is just go to the internet, and I usually go to New Scientist because there's normally something there for me, and I just find a news item from New Scientist. There's usually something with a picture of a black hole or a virus, something like that. I try to find some good news, but that would
that's probably not great news. But we can take any of those links and you just press add news link, paste that in. It should pick up as long as the information's okay on the page, sometimes it doesn't pick up everything. We should pick up a preview image and some titles. We've added a few example ones here, and then it will add as if it's a news article that you've wrote, but when you click on it, you'll jump over into that. There you go.
This is about saving teacher time, right? Because teachers are busy. They don't have time to create whole blog articles usually about orangutans or Shakespeare. So if you can just go to the internet and borrow some content and then feed it in, you can go to YouTube videos as well and get the URL and paste it into those news items, and they come up as well. Ideally, what will happen is once a week or maybe once a fortnight, each of these departments will commit that they're going to steal at least one item of content from the internet and paste it in. So that keeps these subject sites looking current, but without actually doing any web design. All you're actually doing is bringing content in from outside, and everybody can do it. It takes, you know, a minute to learn how to find an item on the internet and add it to a news item. And then, of course, those news items get rolled up to the student homepage as well. So that's a way of giving you live content and authentic content on the student homepage.
So just in addition to that question, we just had a follow-up on it saying, you know, a lot of people use OneNote because it's easy to create that grid where you've got your lesson objectives alongside the resources. And you know, I do think that is a good use of it. But if you have your lesson objectives alongside the resources, you could always link to those resources in that central area. So again, you're not having to duplicate that work. So I think, you know, there's no right or wrong way of using it as long as you keep it, I think, light in the OneNote, in the class notebook. Then you know, that there's not a problem with using that. You just don't want to be embedding all of those resources in each individual class notebook, because it just means you're going to have to update it in lots of different places. But if you've just got links to those central resources alongside the objectives inside that class notebook, then that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. Any other questions, Lloyd, before we finish off? I know it's getting late. We've
It's just a last question that's just come in, just about how would you actually link a file in OneNote, and would the link break if you used to do that?
So Ian, I wouldn't, to be honest. If I've got a file that's somewhere inside one of my Sharepoint subject sites, you can go in and you can just get the link. So Tony will show you that. Find the link, find the item, get link.
I tend to use a Sharepoint link. So what you find is it actually gives you the source ID of the document here. So if you did move the document using the proper move tools, then the link would still work. So I can copy that, and I could paste that into my OneNote, because I know that these students take English, so they will have access to that central English resource. So obviously you can make it obviously look a lot better than that, but that's just a really simple example of pasting that link in there, and they can click on that link and it'll go straight to that central resource.
Yeah, and that's certainly one option. It's a direct link, and this is almost going to depend on your students. If you're doing this with younger students, you might need to put in a very specific link to the document. And as Tony says, you can make it prettier. You could give it a nice kind of thumbnail image behind it, and the image becomes the link, and they click on that and it opens the document. Once you're working with older students though, and you're trying to get them to be independent, I would probably just put some text in there referencing where the document is. Go to your English site and search for the document called, and then they just type that document into search and they'll find it. So you're doing two things there. One, you're leveraging the skills those students already have because they can all use Google. And secondly, you're teaching them how to work in an independent way and how to do, you know, kind of web research. but you're doing it within a walled garden, so you know they're going to be searching safely inside the content areas that you've prescribed rather than just going out to Google and searching for something. So it very much depends on your students, and you know your students better than anyone else. So you can make that decision about whether it's a good idea to link or to just refer to some content.
Okay, I was just going to bring up the final slide and bring John back into the call. So Darren, can you share that slide?
I can.
You've got that set up, haven't you?
There we go.
That's great. No, thanks everybody. I think there's been an incredibly useful and interesting talk, and I think anyone here would have picked up not just one or two, but 3, 4, even 10 hints and tips, which does make a huge difference. So thank you for hosting, guys. RivaNET, we're here to help any schools with any aspect of education technology. But it's been great to see that Cloud Design Box have been helping so many of the schools we work with, and it's been so successful. So 365 and Teams and OneNote and SharePoint, they're big things, and often to get the most out of them, you do need expert help. So I'm glad that we now know where to turn to. But thanks again for everybody's time. It's been really good.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John, and thanks everyone for attending. Hope you found it useful. Like I say, if you want to get in touch with either us or RivaNET, if you want any more information, or if you want to do a more in-depth sort of one-on-one demo and have a more of a chat about it, then feel free to get in contact.